It's a great privilege for me to be able to be here to chair this event, and as it has been through the year, to chair the Commission. The report is structured in terms of a conversation. We've taken into the main report what we said in our interim report, and then we followed it up by recording how people have responded to that, the things we heard, the changes that we made, the conversation that happened there, and then we've gone on to the recommendations, which we obviously tweaked in the light of what we heard in the response to our interim report. And that reflects the process that we've been going on all the way through. We've been continuously trying to get as much response, information, ideas and feedback from people across the borough in different areas, different neighbourhoods, different organisations, so that what we've been doing, we hope, is to be standing back from all the things we do day by day and reflecting back to people a wider vision of what it is that we all see. So we're hoping that as we go forward and as we finish our work as a commission, that what we've done will feed into a continuing conversation. It's not just like a little bubble on its own that just comes to an end, but it's something which is part of that conversation which was there before us and will continue after us about how we make a better Croydon. We've focused on things that we think we can do, and particularly things that we think we can do working together between voluntary sector, businesses and statutory services, all finding that together we have more strength and more resources than we do if we work separately. And what I would hope is that as we take forward this report, that we take forward that spirit, that we can make the change we want to see.
There were 6 key themes that clearly emerged from the research, the engagement and the deliberations that we went through. The first area was around connected communities. We all recognise and know about and understand the size and the variegated geography of Croydon, its distinct areas, identities, assets and challenges. And we know that some areas of the borough will differ in terms of their experiences. Some have more assets than others, some have more challenges than others. But wherever we went, we always found a core of residents and local businesses who were keen to work together to do more to improve their area. And we know, many of the people in this room will know very well about how vast Croydon's voluntary sector is. Over 1,700 organisations working together. But through our engagement, we also came across people who wouldn't necessarily define themselves as volunteers with a capital V, but were engaged in plenty of neighbourly and social action and enjoying that and the benefits that that gives everyone involved. And we also found, through research that the council have done, that 48% of residents would do more to help a neighbour. And it's that kind of appetite that we really wanted to tap into through our focus in this area. We've really tried to think about how the town as a whole can foster, can tap into and can connect that appetite by nearly half of the population potentially in Croydon who are keen to reach out to others. In connection to this area, connected communities, there are a couple of recommendations in this area that I wanted to highlight that really tap into those areas. One is about more power for neighbourhood centres. So we believe that where the demand is there should be ways to agree further devolution of power to neighbourhood centres. And that could give residents and local businesses the opportunity to work together to a greater extent than they have now in a more direct role in improving the area at street level. And supporting this, we think that perhaps a unit or a team within the council can help make this happen. The second one is around increased participation, and again amongst people who wouldn't necessarily see themselves as a volunteer. And we thought that maybe the council could really take a lead in this area by perhaps encouraging their own staff to volunteer. And of course there are many staff within the council who already do this, and they are enabled to some extent by the council, giving a small amount of time each year. But we wondered if the council could do more to support that enthusiasm and give a minimum of 3 days a year to council staff, perhaps setting a series of social priorities that the council would want to support. It could be facilitated externally to maximise that engagement, and we thought the council's own leadership could perhaps lead the way by dedicating a day of their time to demonstrate their commitment, again perhaps backing some of the key issues as the council sees it for the town. We thought then that other organisations could then pursue that same model, and then also an online facility perhaps to directly connect residents, and community organisations, so that those who do want to do more but aren't quite sure where to get involved can channel their enthusiasm for greater activity. Naturally, given the huge development that is planned for the town centre for the next few years, offers huge opportunities, and it would be odd if the Commission hadn't reflected on these. But we were conscious as a Commission that those opportunities and that development also carries risks. Risks that development doesn't benefit the whole Croydon population evenly, and we believe the Council can be tougher with the developers to ensure that those benefits are delivered. We heard a great deal from residents about their concerns about the reputation of the town, and we believe that the town centre more needs to be done to build a high-skill, high-pay economy in the town centre that genuinely can, as the slide says, start to lift the rest of the borough through the town centre. And we also believe that a much more diverse and dynamic arts and cultural offer could contribute to that effort to improve the town centre. And that would benefit not just the town, but potentially the rest of London as a region, and indeed the South East. So thinking about that area, again, there were some recommendations that we've made, and I want to focus on two in particular, although you'll find more in the final report. Firstly, we believe that the Council's jobs brokerage service, which will work with employers and developers to match local people to jobs, we think that could be even more inclusive than the plans set out now, by ensuring, firstly, that 3 local people are considered for every job recruited, secondly, with at least one of those 3 people interviewed, and more done in our view to ensure that young, black and minority ethnic and disabled local people are developing the skills they need to succeed in our local job market. The second area is around a Croydon employment charter. Organisations that would sign up to this charter would do a number of things, demonstrating their leadership for progressive practice in the town. And those would be, firstly, paying the London living wage. There are still more than 1 in 4 people in Croydon earning less than the living wage at the moment, and we only have 8 employers, as we understand, in the town actually paying the living wage. So that would be an important development. So firstly, paying the London living wage. Secondly, using the Council's brokerage service, which I just mentioned. Thirdly, displaying best employment practice. We heard a lot from disabled people and organisations about how employment practice could be much more accessible to disabled candidates. And then fourthly, offer flexible working and promoting more flexible working options within the town. And we believe that the Council could use its proposed new powers to offer reductions in business rates for those businesses that show leadership in this way. Thirdly, not surprisingly, with the largest population in London of young people, we looked at education, and this concept of leaving no child behind really resonated with every member of the Commission as an important principle to which we should be working. And we all know about the importance of a child's early years, how so many of our life chances, at least statistically, appear to be predetermined from pre-birth, let alone when we actually pitch up at primary school. And in Croydon we discovered that the number of children achieving what the government measures as a good level of development by age 5 is actually below the average. And we also know that nationally the gap in attainment between those who are advantaged and those who are less so is widening. Croydon also has the highest population in London of children who are cared for by the local authority, and the prevalence of children in the borough with special educational needs is high. And our Youth Commission in particular talked to us about mental and emotional well-being as being a real priority for them. And addressing all these things is increasingly challenging with a more fragmented education system. So some of the recommendations that we identified, so 3 things to perhaps highlight here. Firstly, we wanted to see an increase in nurture groups in schools, in those schools with the highest needs. We came across this practice in Croydon, but we think it can be expanded further, and we've seen from evaluation from across the country that this can be very successful. And what this gives children who arrive at school who are not quite ready, it gives them the dedicated space within school to develop those skills that they really need to unleash their potential as they go on further. Secondly, we discovered that there's £20 million worth of money that's generated in the borough through the pupil premium. And yet, of course, that's spent individually by individual schools. And we wanted to make sure that that money is really leveraging the most maximum opportunity that it can and that it can provide for Croydon's children. And as a result, drawing on evidence from the Youth Commission, we felt more of that should be spent on well-being and behavioural support. We want heads to be talking much more than they are at the moment, to be sharing what they're doing so that they're following best practice when they're commissioning individual therapeutic interventions. And then thirdly, we also want to see the Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group supporting this effort by investing in some evaluation so that what that money is being spent on is really identifying that best practice. The fourth area was a focus on isolation. Nationally, 1 in 10 of those who are over 65 say they are lonely either all or some of the time. And for older people, that level of isolation can be twice as detrimental to health as obesity. Older people are more likely to experience isolation, but not exclusively so. We also heard about the experience of isolation that disabled people, particularly those with mental health conditions and who live with autism, experienced as well. And indeed, the quote on the slide comes from someone who was new to the UK, and their experience of not having access to support through benefits, having very limited social networks. They found a food bank as an opportunity to actually have some social interaction. However, it's not just the human pain that loneliness and social isolation can cause. For those statutory organisations, it represents a real financial time bomb for the town, given the pressures that there already are on social care services. And that can be, as we've read about in the press, exacerbated by people who are not able to return home from hospital when they may be well, but essentially can't return home because of the isolation that they experience. So again, just to highlight some of the recommendations from this area, we felt that this was an area that was acknowledged, but maybe not a sufficient priority for the town, and we'd really like to see the Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group demonstrating greater place leadership in this area and setting social isolation as a real priority for the borough. And what could go along with that is a joint strategic needs analysis which could find out much more on the topic, and a session of the Croydon Congress which brings the public, private and voluntary sector together twice a year to focus on this area about how we can better respond. Secondly, our interim report pointed towards social prescribing, which is where people are linked to social and physical activities over more medical interventions. But we found that people found this approach, as we presented it, quite off-putting, and they felt that maybe individuals, rather than necessarily their doctors, might know what was best for them socially. But there was agreement that signposting from GP surgeries and potentially other community venues could be useful, and that the capacity to provide a form of outreach located in those facilities, such as GP surgeries, could help link people who are isolated with outlets that can help provide them with that support. And we also felt that the Commission, as a Commission, that the Council could perhaps consider using its new powers to raise a 2% precept for social care introduced by government, that using some of that money could be used to tackle social isolation. It will be unsurprising if the Commission did not look at housing. It's emerged very quickly as a theme for us, and it's perhaps the biggest issue facing Croydon. And having identified the broad issue of housing, homelessness in particular very quickly rose to the top of the Commission's considerations and emerging as a priority even within that. And it's very much supported by the evidence. The demand for temporary accommodation within the borough has grown every year since 2009, with currently 2,500 families living in temporary accommodation, and it costs a huge £5.7 million a year. In addition to that, we know that now eviction from the private rented sector, rather than family breakdown, is the most common cause of homelessness in the borough. And we heard from Citizens Advice in Croydon that at as high a rate as 8 in 10 landlords won't rent to people on housing benefits. And we heard from both them and from others about how preventative action to prevent homelessness is crucial. So our recommendations, we focused on assets in our drive to find some solutions in this particular area. And drawing on what many people will know as Airbnb, which connects people to holiday rentals, we came up with this idea of perhaps what could be described as a fair B&B, as in a way to incentivise residents, particularly homeowners, who could perhaps offer shelter to somebody without a home. The council does actually already run initiatives on quite a small scale and with particularly vulnerable people. There's one called Shared Lives, where residents open their homes to others who are more vulnerable and need support. And indeed, CAISH, Croydon Action for Young, Single and Homeless, run supported lodging schemes, which are very successful. And what we were interested in was whether we could upscale the impact of this idea if it could be expanded, particularly to perhaps less vulnerable people, but who have no home. The statistics, interestingly, do show that there is a room for every person in Croydon, but naturally, because of the way assets are distributed unevenly in the borough, that's not the case in terms of homelessness, but we did think that perhaps this was something that we could look at. The second, thinking about the rising importance of the private rented sector within people's opportunity to get housing, was about a temporary short-term loans solution to help people with those short-term difficulties when they're moving. So, for example, because a landlord can, at their own discretion, terminate a tenancy, people don't often have, within that month period, the opportunity to get that deposit together, which could be withheld, and then also the month's rent, at least a month's rent on top of that. And we thought that this perhaps could help prevent people falling quite quickly into homelessness. And thirdly, an idea of a good agent and landlord charter, where those who signed up would do three things. Firstly, a commitment to rent to people on housing benefit. Secondly, to signpost tenants automatically to those who are starting to fall into arrears. This comes back to this idea of preventing homelessness. To be able to signpost people, it could be to the council's gateway service, it could be to Citizens Advice Croydon, for the help that they could get, and access to money-wise training and support to help them with getting themselves out of those financial difficulties at an early stage. And then thirdly, to display best practice when accommodating disabled tenants. That could be about making some very relatively simple improvements to a property, but nevertheless. So those three things could perhaps support those who are signing up to a good agents and landlord charter. And we think that the council could perhaps offer a discount to those landlords who sign up to this charter from the licensing scheme to incentivise even better standards in our housing sector. And then our last area was looking at work and living standards, because we found out, and because we know, and because we discovered through our work about how many residents are currently undergoing significant financial pressure. We know that 1 in 4 children in the borough lives in poverty, and we know that 1 in 3 residents are living close to the brink, who would describe themselves as struggling financially and who would struggle to make an unexpected payment of £500. We also know that there's a high level of disabled people in the borough who are either out of work or underemployed, and that matches the national picture of the fact that disabled people are almost twice as likely to be unemployed compared to non-disabled people. And of course, we know that persistent inequality is well connected to the lack of access to opportunities, whether that's the first step into work itself, or the little access to well-established networks and social connections, and how those can contribute to inequality even in the job sector. So our recommendations for this final area, just focusing again on a handful of those. One of those was to support a wider rollout of First Step, which has been a campaign by Croydon citizens working with one of the Croydon councillors, Jamie Audsley, to promote better quality work experience for our young people. And we felt that particularly this could be focused on the more deprived parts of the borough, where perhaps people were less likely to have those social connections. We also thought again about new services in GP surgeries to provide employment and benefit support for disabled people, so as to kind of provide people with the next step to work. This facility could be linked to services to tackle social isolation, as I talked about earlier, and it's already happening in Islington. This was something that we heard about that's operating there in response to an employment commission that they ran, and we were interested to see how this approach could be adapted and introduced in Croydon. We also felt that availability of money-wise training, including debt consolidation, benefits, and on other areas more broadly, could be very helpful. And while I mentioned it earlier in relation to the town centre, but the Croydon Employment Charter, again, promoting the London Living Wage, promoting progressive employment practice, promoting flexible working, could all contribute to raising people's living standards. And that concludes the overview of the findings of the recommendations, and I hope that's given you a good sense of our thinking, our deliberations, and the conclusions that we've come to.
We committed as commissioners to meet again in October this year and in a year's time from now to assess and comment on how the recommendations that we've proposed have been progressed. And what we are proposing for the means for doing that are 4 things. Firstly, we're proposing that the local strategic partnership should take overall responsibility for implementation of the report's findings. So that's a body which is bringing together many of the main partners across the borough. Secondly, we're proposing that a cabinet member in the borough should have responsibility within the council for overseeing implementation. And again, within the council, we want to propose that the Scrutiny and Overview Committee monitor how changes have been implemented and their impact. So there will be people who have the job of checking out whether it's happened and reporting back on that. And finally, we're proposing that a website is maintained so that the report and follow-up monitoring implementation can easily be viewed by organisations and residents of Croydon.
I'm Councillor Mark Watson, Cabinet Member for Community Safety and Justice, and ultimately it will be my responsibility to try and make sure many of these things get implemented as we go forward. I'd like first to just thank Jonathan and the whole team for bringing this together. I think it's been a fantastic piece of work, and I think we've been very proud of what they've achieved. Some of the things you asked for commitments for, LSP, yes, this will go to the LSP, it will be used by the LSP to inform policy across all of our partners as we go forward. There will be a cabinet member, myself, probably, that will take this forward and oversee this.
My question really is just for businesses, organisations and societies who do want to get involved off the back of something like this, how open to collaboration is the Council or the Opportunity Croydon Commission, and where do you go forward from here?
I work for an organisation called Croydon Commitment. It's actually a charity that works to link businesses with the local community through corporate volunteering. Has 28 partners, and last year had nearly 1,400 volunteer hours wrapped up from simply businesses wanting to get involved with the community.
The regeneration that Westfield announced just over 3 years ago, which is sort of over £1 billion worth of investment into the town, into the physical of the town centre, has sort of created an inward investment of over £4 million worth of it's easy to get a bit lost in, but billions of pounds worth of other investment, and you can see that happening in the town centre. When I was invited to come onto the commission, I was delighted because we were already doing, actually with Karen as well, with CVA, outreach and community work.
I'm Karen Chilman and I head up the Volunteer Centre in Croydon. So there is a Volunteer Centre in Croydon, and I just had a look on our website, and we have 295 live opportunities for people to get involved in their community.
What we do say is it's time to work with the community to agree a shared vision of a better future. The one thing we do not want to see is something being imposed on the community, because of someone else's plan about solving somewhere else's problem.
I hope the reporter would have done something to ensure everyone is better in Croydon. So the deprived areas have covered, and so they become join the prosperity of some of the areas in Croydon.
And we have worked throughout on the basis of the consensus that came up in the original surveys of people in Croydon about what people thought was fair. And people came very clearly out with the viewpoint that they felt fairness involved an equal starting point. It involved equal opportunity. It's about enabling people to have the same life chances, the same opportunities, being able to fulfil their gifts to the full. That was the message that we got back about what people thought would be unfair and what should be fair. And that's what we want to argue. Where there are resources available, they should be targeted at making those things fair. And that was, I think, something that I hope really comes through in the whole of the report.